So there's this comic, or webtoon more appropriately, which is called I Want to Be a Cute Anime Girl. Yeah, the title is particular, I would say. The story is, as you would expect, is basically just grooming someone to become trans. And just like with the previous example, I'll explain how it's a little bit odd in some ways. So I couldn't be arsed to read all the 294 chapters which are out right now. As such, I read from 1 to 30 and from 290 to 294, and I think that should provide a somewhat balanced overview of the whole thing. So I can't really call it even a story. I can't really call the chapters because they're more equivalent to 2 pages in a manga each than a proper chapter. So the stories from the chapters 1 to 10 start with a young boy, like I think first year high school because that's the standard, being not confident about his appearance, feeling not manly, feeling shy, stuff like that. And then his sister comes in to cross-dress him, which is played off as a joke. But he really gets into it, liking his new appearance way more because he looks really cute, stuff like that. He's really into that. And he feels way more confident in his new appearance, Soon a female friend comes by, 2 chapters later, and is confused. The reaction is quickly played off and the friend becomes really supportive, saying that she only felt a little bit uncomfortable because he now looks way cuter than her. And it generally is just established that he feels more comfortable looking like his female form rather than his male form, to the point where the cross-dressing continues, but is still done just like in his room with his sister. So what is exactly happening here? I think it's a pretty normal thing to be a boy in his teens and not be happy with your appearance. It's basically the default thing. The way humans grow up and mature is the same as every other ape. If you look at, I can give here 2 examples, gorillas and orangutans. A female gorilla reaches full maturity and development at the age of around 8, while an adult gorilla takes to around 16. A male gorilla at 8 looks roughly the same as a female gorilla at 8. He's not in a high societal status position. Only the actual older males lead the herd because they're twice as big and much physically stronger. Whereas the female accepts her full position and responsibility and height of status as soon as she reaches the age of 8. Similar something happens with orangutans, even though they don't have a social structure. A female orangutan is roughly half the size of a male. But a male reaches his full size and those funny flaps on the sides of his face only when he's nearly twice the age of when a female is considered an adult and can have children. And it's not dissimilar in humans. If you really notice how women look, how men look, a woman at 16 to 20 has basically completely stopped developing biologically. From that point on, she has reached all her secondary sexual characteristics. She has reached how her body will basically look. From that age on, a woman just ages. So that's, you could say, the peak of the societal status and biological growth and maturation. A man, on the other hand, only really stops developing when he hits 30, 32. And I'm sure a lot of people notice this, when you're 16, 18, you still have very narrow shoulders, you can't grow a beard, you still can have more softer facial features. Basically, you look like those, I don't know, fanboys or those K-pop people. If you work out, you can speed up this process of your shoulders getting wider, and it's because of higher testosterone. But generally, men only really start being able to grow beards and get really broad shoulders in their late 20s. That's when the final stage of biological growth happens. Which is why boys in their teens feel very insecure, because while a woman when she's 15 to 16 can somewhat look like a woman looks at her best, like an adult woman, a boy in his teens does not look like the mature form of a man, like a man in his 30s. And that can certainly lead to insecurity. And it's certainly understandable why someone would want to quote-unquote switch. But it's somewhat a fact that this can also be seen in stories, how they're written. Very often when you read women-centric stories, it's a story of how a woman comes into a position of power of some sort, like a princess, a consort, stuff like that, or inherits her family and has to now deal with this extra responsibility. Whereas the story centered for men, like shonen ones, are someone starts from the bottom and has to claw their way up. Because that's generally also how it goes in life. Women reach their like peak value where their stuff is given to them pretty early in their 20s, and they need to live up to that, and then have problems like advancing later in life in their 30s and 40s. Whereas men have generally a much rougher start, but it gets better and better with them as time progresses generally. This means that certainly if you're a young man, it seems very appealing to hate yourself, and especially if you're like a feminine looking man, so short, skinny, not much masculine features, you could think to yourself it's easier to just become a woman than a man. So I guess there's an advantage to being ugly looking rather than female looking, because at least you don't have this weird temptation. I do think that this is one of the problems of the modern society, because even if you like start the transition process, your body will still start developing like a man's one in its 20s and its 30s. I knew a guy who used to be a cross-dresser when he was younger, and he basically said like that. The secret to cross-dressing is being young. That's basically it. If you go past 20, it's just gonna get worse and worse. Chapters 10 to 20 are similar. There's a bit more slice of life stuff with just the trainee's friend in it. The interesting parts in it that I picked out is the parents self-gaslighting themselves. The mother is basically more concerned, confused by the whole situation, and tells the father, who instantly accepts it and starts saying that there were signs that their son actually wants to be a woman. The only one of the signs that's actually brought up is that he always picks female characters in video games, which to me sounds kinda like gaslighting. Not just of the father himself, or maybe of the son, but definitely gaslighting of the audience. Like, I usually pick female characters in games. Seems to me rather normal. And a lot of other men do. That's because men are into women. Which might be a bit of an odd idea for some of the modern people, but yeah, men are into women. And the other odd moment which happens is that the main character is finally convinced to go out in his new appearance, and he goes out to a store with his sister and a female friend, and they try on clothes there. Well, there they meet a guy on the way, and the guy like pays attention to the main character like a man would, with him responding in kind, and you see like blushing, so yeah, he's enamored with quote unquote her. I think this is also somewhat emblematic of why a young man would feel themselves wanting to transition. The fact is that when like a guy wants to date, if he asks out women, he's gonna be rejected 90% of the time, or completely ignored, not paid attention to, treated like a creep just for looking at them. But as soon as you transition, heck, even if you're an ugly woman, you will be approached at men, you will be looked at men, you will be shown the type of interest from the opposite sex, or I guess in this case the same sex, you were never shown before in any meaningful way. So if you are a young lonely man, it's basically an easy way out. Like, I mean, you can go to dating websites and you'll see there are 300-kilogram woman saying she's in an open relationship and wants to find a man for a threesome. That's because men sadly are like that, especially young ones. They just go for whatever is available. And this is an observable phenomenon with the transmaxers who notice this phenomenon, and even though they're not transgender, they use hypnosis techniques to make themselves transgender, because they know they can have quoted easier life that way, ignoring the fact that the easy mode women have in life basically ends at 30. And as time passes, men start having it generally often better. Now, I didn't even check any of the chapters in between and went straight to chapter 290, and again, I didn't check this before, was surprised to just find an outright example of how transgenderism can spread, and the transgender already grooming one of his friends. Of course, he like goes with a female friend to a restaurant, already in his like female form, and they talk. One of the things he asks is if his voice sounds female. The female friend then responds that not really, but it doesn't sound like a guy either. And he's like half happy, half sad about it, saying that he needs to practice and stuff like that. But he will get better and he's happy about the honesty. Which basically means that after this skip of chapters, I see that he just full on wants to transition now. And instantly the friend starts talking about how her acquaintance, obviously her, wants to transition to be a boy. And rather than like, and instantly the female the transgender MC starts saying how that's wonderful and how he would be happy to meet that friend because then he would have someone to relate to and they probably have similar experiences to talk to. And it's like this nearly giddy response, which is also a way to gaslight people into being a tranny, because if you are a loner, if you have no friends, you can very easily find a supportive and toxically positive friend group just by trying to transition. Because that's how they act. You are not allowed to say anything out of line, mind you. That's not allowed. You will then be exercised because it's kind of like a cult. But if you are an enthusiastic transgender which wants to transition and you are lonely and you're young, it's an eerily easy trap to find a very supportive and friendly friend group through starting to be a political activist or transgender. The whole thing about the story that I noticed that in many ways it's a power fantasy for transgenders. It's someone who wishes they started transitioning in their teens, where they could have had those teenage girl experiences of getting your first crush, of hanging out with friends, going to the mall, stuff like that, which can't really be recaptured when you're already an adult. It's a world where no one really challenges being trans. At most, they need a bit of time to adjust. And lastly, it's a bit of a caricature of being a woman. It's a picture-perfect example of autogenophilia, where the main reason the MC feels like they need to become a woman is because they are into cute stuff and they want to be cute. And they want to be actually a cute anime girl. That's how it starts. And then it just turns into normal transgenderism. And all the uncomfortable truths which come with aging are just pushed aside in the way. And now the maybe more depressing part about this. While the previous story about the time travel thing I talk about was some obscure Twitter shit, this is on Webtoon, a comic website or comic book platform, which is relatively popular. And as far as I know, it has 350,000 people subscribe to it, and way more people reading the concurrent chapters as they come out, with even more likely reading it off platform on different websites. So it's actually a pretty popular thing, sadly, and it's a bit scary to think how many people might have been actually convinced to transition because they saw all the positive depictions of it in this, and to how many suicides and stuff this will lead down the line. Probably at least a few hundred.